Chapter 1. The moon was a silver shard caught in the skeletal branches of the ancient oaks, casting long, fractured shadows across the grounds of Blackwood Manor. Everything was steeped in the melancholic monochrome of late autumn, the frost-bitten grass, the gray marble facade of the house, the perpetual silent drift of ash from the distant, unquenchable pyres of the war-torn lowlands. Lord Cassian, Dominus of the First Covenant, stood at the tallest, narrowest window of the east wing, a vigil he had kept for nearly 3 centuries. He was a monument carved from sorrow and granite, his skin the shade of polished alabaster, his eyes, once the warm, vibrant gold of a harvest sun, now held the cold, calculating sheen of rare amber. His stillness was not rest. It was the coiled, terrible quiet of a predator, yet his purpose was only to wait. His existence was defined by guilt, a burden heavy and sharp as the ancient sanguis oath he carried, to protect the last bloodline of the oracle, a line he had, in a moment of ancient folly, nearly extinguished. He heard her before he saw her, the sound a thin, desperate thread against the vast, muffled silence of the estate. It was not the sound of a scream, which he could have ignored as a phantom of his tormented mind, but the sound of small, frantic footsteps, a child running, stumbling, and the high, reedy sound of unadulterated distress. Melody, his anchor, his charge, the last flicker of hope in a world consumed by loneliness and shadow. He did not move with the liquid grace of a common vampire, but with an accelerated, purposeful blur. The distance from the third-floor corridor to the grand, dust-shrouded hall below vanished in a single, soundless glide. He materialized, a figure of daunting height and formal, dark attire, in the doorway, his silhouette blocking the meager moonlight. The girl, no more than 6 years old, was a tiny, vibrant disruption in the room's funereal quiet. Her red nightgown was rumpled, her face streaked with tears, and her small chest heaved with great, ragged sobs. Her hair, the dark, rich brown of fertile earth, was a tangle of disarray. She did not stop, did not hesitate. Her terror was focused, absolute, and her destination was him. She ran past the suits of lifeless armor, past the cracked, painted portraits of his forgotten ancestors, and slammed into his thigh, gripping the fabric of his black trousers with surprising strength. "They're hurting my mom," she choked out, the words muffled against the cold, expensive cloth. Her voice, usually a bright, resilient chime, was broken by panic. "The bad men, the men with the blue fire, in the basement. She told me to run. She told me to find the anchor. Please, Lord Cassian, please, they're going to take her like they took Papa." The small body trembled violently, a catastrophic tremor that Cassian felt resonate deep within his own preternaturally still heart. This was the moment, the high-stakes escalation he had prepared for years, centuries. Not a slow, strategic assault, but a swift, brutal, surgical strike. The bad men with the blue fire were the Inquisitors of the Obsidian Cross, a rogue faction of the Templar Order, fanatics who hunted any trace of the ethereal bloodline. They sought the Oracle for her prophecy and her inherent world-shaping power, and they would not stop until her line was extinguished or enslaved. Cassian knelt instantly, a rarity that caused his stiff joints to give a subtle, audible click. He placed one impossibly cold, long-fingered hand gently against the crown of her head, his touch a promise of fiercest protection. "Hush, little sparrow. Tell me everything, quickly and quietly," he commanded, his voice a low, formal baritone, like the distant rumble of thunder. He maintained the calm, detached facade of the Dominus, but beneath the marble skin, his inner landscape was a maelstrom of white-hot tension and driven, protective fury. The melancholy that usually defined his demeanor had been burned away by the immediate, visceral need to act. Mercy was a forgotten word in his vocabulary, reserved only for his charge and her mother, Alara. Where are they? How many? Was the ward broken? Melody sniffled, pushing down her terror with a conviction that always staggered him. The child was fearless for what she loved. 3 men. They came through the cellar door. The pretty swirling silver door is gone, she whispered, her eyes wide and luminous, holding his. Mom tried to fight with the wood fire, but they used the blue fire. She gave me this. She opened a tiny, trembling fist, revealing a small, tarnished silver locket, the ancient sigil of the Blood Oracle, a focal point for the line's latent power. Cassian took the locket, his cold skin meeting her warm, damp palm. The artifact pulsed once, a faint, almost imperceptible thrum of raw magic, confirming the stakes. The ward, a highly descriptive lattice of complex ancient covenant sigils woven into the very structure of the house, was down. They were exposed. This was not a warning. It was a siege. He stood up in a single, fluid motion, his back to the girl, and drew the long, heavy kopis blade from the ornamental display above the mantelpiece. The metal, dark and matte, did not reflect the meager light, absorbing it, instead, an ancient, sparse, and purposeful weapon. Stay here. Do not move from this spot. If you hear a sound, you run. You run to the crypt, and you tell the stone guard I sent you. Understand, Melody? He did not look back. He did not need to. He felt the weight of her fearful, quiet hope and the immense, terrifying gravity of her hidden, prophetic power. His long, black coat billowed out behind him as he descended into the darkness of the cellars, a terrifyingly beautiful vision of lethal intent. The Dominus was going to war, driven by the pure, singular force of his self-hatred and the need to protect the one light that still pierced his unending night. The battle would be brutal, sudden, and absolutely definitive. He would die before he allowed the blue fire to touch his charge or her mother. His old guilt demanded nothing less. The cold, thick air in the cellars was already acrid, with the sharp scent of ozone and the unmistakable, rich, coppery scent of fresh human blood. Chapter 2. The cellar was a subterranean labyrinth of cold stone, damp earth, and barrels long forgotten, smelling of dust and age. The atmosphere was heavy, charged, a perfect staging ground for the sudden, brutal action that Cassian craved. He moved with a predatory stillness, his senses extended far beyond the normal capacity of his kind. He was not merely listening. He was feeling the vibrations of the stone, tasting the chemical signature of the blue ethereal fire, and identifying the precise location and number of his assailants. The Inquisitors were crude, fanatical in their conviction, relying on numbers and reckless fervor rather than strategy. He found the first one quickly, positioned behind a stack of rotted crates, aiming a crudely fashioned ether pistol toward a darkened alcove. The man wore the rough-spun robes and heavy silver-inlaid vambraces of the Obsidian Cross, a uniform of absolute, misguided zeal. Cassian did not slow his stride. The dark kopis blade, designed for efficiency, whispered through the air in a downward arc. There was a wet, choked sound, a single moment of high-stakes vulnerability for the fanatic, and then nothing. The man crumpled, not even having time to register the speed of his own demise. Cassian barely paused, his action sparse and purposeful, already refocusing on the main chamber. He stepped into the open space, the air thick with the metallic tang of Alara's blood and the oppressive heat radiating from the arcane energy. The scene was laid out like a Gothic tableau. Alara, Melody's mother, lay crumpled against a pillar, her delicate, dark academic robes torn, a long, superficial but bleeding wound on her forearm. Her eyes, though clouded with pain, held the fiercely protective, immense conviction of a warrior. She was not the Oracle, but she was the guardian of the Oracle, and she had fought with the strength of 10 men. Standing over her were the remaining 2 Inquisitors. One was a hulking brute, his face contorted with dark self-righteousness, holding a heavy, silver-tipped flail. The other, the leader, was a lean, intense man, his hands glowing with the telltale, sinister light of the blue fire, a rare, corrupted form of ether channeling. His face bore the look of someone who had suffered for his twisted version of the divine, a kind of dark irony. The Dominus, the leader sneered, the fire flickering in his hands. We knew you would come, the protector of the taint. You cannot hide forever, Ancient One. The girl's power belongs to the one God, not your foul covenant. Cassian's voice, when it came, was dangerously quiet, resonating with a controlled fury that made the stone walls seem to vibrate. It was a formal pronouncement, cold as the marble of his skin. You have trespassed on consecrated ground. You have harmed my charge. You have sealed your end, Inquisitor. The fight that followed was a deliberately rhythmic ballet of supernatural violence against fanatical human desperation. The hulking brute charged first, swinging the flail in a wide, crushing arc. Cassian met the blow, not with evasion, but with the flat of his blade, the impact sounding like a gunshot in the confined space. The force was immense, but Cassian absorbed it with casual ease, his feet barely scraping the stone. He used the momentum of the brute's failed attack against him, pivoting with liquid grace. The coppice was a blur, not targeting vital organs, but joints and ligaments, a calculated act of high-stakes cruelty designed to maximize pain and limit further movement. The brute fell, a heap of broken limbs and shattered conviction, his screams cut short by the sight of Cassian's unnaturally bright, amber eyes fixed upon him. He was out of the fight, but not dead, a warning for the leader. The leader, seeing the impossible speed and strength, hesitated for only a fraction of a second, but that was all the time Cassian needed. The vampire did not wait for the blue fire to be fully channeled. He threw the heavy, blunt end of the coppice like a javelin. The sparse and purposeful action was devastating. The weapon struck the leader's shoulder with a sickening crunch, pinning him instantly against the wall. The blue fire dissipated in a shower of sparks, the channeling broken by the sheer, blunt trauma. The leader gasped, his breath ragged, his dark trauma finally visible beneath the zealotry. You cannot save her. The prophecy will be fulfilled. The ether, it will consume everything. He spat, his eyes wide with a combination of fear and fanatic fervor. Cassian retrieved his blade with a soundless yank, the weapon returning to his hand, stained but efficient. He stood over the leader, his massive frame radiating cold. The close third-person narrative shifted, offering a glimpse into the Vampire King's deep melancholy. I have seen the end of empires, Inquisitor. I have buried everything I have ever loved. I will not bury her. The covenant is older than your church, and my oath is unbreakable, Cassian stated, the finality in his voice absolute. He did not kill the leader outright, a powerful mercy that was as chilling as any act of violence. He simply incapacitated him, leaving him bleeding, wounded, and terrified on the cold stone floor, a living testament to the sheer, terrifying power he protected. He turned from the dying men and moved to Alara. She was already pushing herself up, her hand clamped over her wound, her eyes filled with immense vulnerability and a quiet hope that shattered the dark academia of the scene. Melody, she whispered, the single most important question. Cassian gently touched her shoulder, a rare, intimate gesture. Safe. She ran to her anchor. Now, let us return to the light and tend to this. We must move quickly. They know the location. The siege has begun. The fight was over, the battle won, but the war, he knew, had just started its terrifying, inexorable escalation. Chapter 3 Alara's wound was a clean, deep slice across the forearm, bleeding profusely but not life-threatening, a testament to her fierce, albeit outmatched, defense. Cassian led her swiftly back up the narrow, curving staircase, his immense frame supporting her slight weight. The urgency was palpable, a thrumming tension that replaced the cellar's cold fury. The pacing was deliberately rhythmic, a swift, silent ascent, followed by a moment of sharp, necessary action. He carried her not with passion, but with the necessary formal grace of a guardian fulfilling a vital duty. When they emerged into the main hall, Melody was exactly where he had left her, a tiny, huddled island of quiet hope in the vast, shadowed expanse. She launched herself at her mother, not at him, a natural, undeniable bond that brought a fresh wave of sharp, ancient guilt to the Dominus. He remembered another child, centuries ago, running to a mother he could not save. "Mom, you're bleeding," Melody cried, her earlier terror giving way to an immediate, visceral concern. Alara held her daughter close, pressing her cheek against the crown of Melody's head. "I'm fine, little sparrow, just a scrape. Lord Cassian is here, and everything is fine. You were so brave." The lie was meant for the child, but Cassian heard the intimate, immense vulnerability in Alara's voice. She knew this was far from over. Cassian moved with unnerving speed, retrieving a fine linen cloth from a nearby table, a forgotten heirloom of a forgotten time, and pressed it firmly to Alara's wound. His movements were clinical, efficient, and entirely without warmth, yet the simple act of tending was the ultimate expression of his fiercely protective drive. He was a creature of darkness, but his actions were, by necessity, acts of powerful mercy. "The Inquisitors are incapacitated," he stated, his voice a low, formal drone that cut through the child's soft crying and her mother's reassurances. "But they are not the only threat. They have located the manor. This structure is compromised. The ward is irreparable, the ethereal traces too deep. We must leave Blackwood now." This was the crux of the high-stakes escalation. Blackwood Manor, the ancient fortress of the Covenant, was supposed to be their final refuge, a place so remote and magically shielded that it was immune to discovery. Its fall meant the entire, dark, political thriller of their existence was exposed. Alara looked up at him, her eyes catching the minimal light, filled with a Grimm's-driven conviction. "Where, Cassian? There is nowhere left to hide. The old covenants are either broken or have turned against us. The witches' citadel, the mountain passes, they'll be watching all the traditional routes." Her question was not born of panic, but of a deep, strategic understanding of their predicament. She was the anchor of the bloodline, and her life was defined by survival. Cassian stood fully erect, his gaze distant, looking past them at the dark, skeletal branches outside the window. His internal state was one of tense, poetic introspection. Another retreat, always moving, always running from the very history I created. The world is a vast, gray tomb. He finally turned back, his expression immutable, the perfect picture of an ancient, solitary loneliness. "There is one place left, a place no one living knows of, a place I sealed away millennia ago." He paused, and his eyes dropped to Melody, the ultimate, undeniable point of his life. The catacombs of the first ancestor. It is a crypt, a vault, deep beneath the old city, shielded by a magical, philosophical paradox, a place designed to protect not life, but the memory of life. Its wards are tied to my own life force. It is the perfect tomb to weather this siege. His language was formal, infused with the dark academia of ancient lore. "A tomb," Alara repeated, her voice laced with sharp, self-deprecating irony. "Always the perfect, beautiful death with you, Cassian." She managed a small, tired smile. "And what about you, Dominus? If the wards are tied to your life force, how do you expect to remain above ground and continue the fight? You are their main target." She was not asking for herself, but for the one protector she knew she could rely on. He finally took the silver locket from his pocket, holding the tarnished sigil in the center of his palm. He looked at the child, who was now quietly watching them, sensing the immense gravity of the conversation. I am the distraction. I will use the locket to funnel the remainder of the manor's ethereal energy into one great burst, a false beacon of prophecy. It will draw the enemy, the full force of the Templars and the Covenant traitors, here to Blackwood. The high-stakes vulnerability was his own. He was offering himself up as the ultimate sacrifice. You and Melody, under the cover of the ensuing chaos, will take the hidden passage in the library. It leads directly to the old city. He knelt before Melody again, his terrifying beauty somehow softened by the deep, sad light in his eyes. He took her tiny hand in his and gently placed the locket back into her palm. This is your anchor, little sparrow. Hold it tight. You are the future. You are the choice. Always remember that, Melodia. He stood, the matter settled. The deliberate rhythm of the decision-making was over. The movement was now all action. Go, now. I will give you a head start. The vast, dark manor suddenly felt terrifyingly small, a stage set for a terrifying, singular confrontation. Chapter 4. The departure was executed with the stark, poetic efficiency that characterized all of Cassian's most difficult decisions. There were no protracted goodbyes, no grand theatrical declarations, only the necessary sparse movements of survival. Alara, her resolve hardening with every passing moment, pulled Melody into the concealed doorway behind the fourth bookshelf in the dusty, ancient library. The child, sensing the finality of the moment, clung to her mother but looked back only once, her wide, luminous eyes locking onto the tall, dark figure of Lord Cassian. In that fleeting glance, Cassian saw not just fear, but a flicker of the immense inherent power he was protecting, a quiet, nascent conviction that promised to one day reshape the world. He met her gaze with his own cold, amber severity, his look a promise of protection that transcended the physical distance already separating them. His stillness was absolute, his purpose singular, to be the shield. The instant the hidden stone door sealed with a quiet, nearly imperceptible grind, a sound that marked their final isolation, Cassian began the terrifying, necessary preparations. He walked to the center of the library, the enormous room a monument to forgotten knowledge and dust. The scent of old parchment, dry rot, and cold marble was all-consuming. He knelt, placing the kopis blade beside him, and extended both hands over the intricate hexagonal covenant sigil carved into the stone floor, the focal point of the manor's now broken ward. He was using the close third-person narrative to provide deep insight into the internal, complex conflict raging within him. This is not just a shield, it is a confession, the final act of guilt. He was about to sacrifice his ancient sanctuary, his physical connection to the past, to guarantee their future. He reached deep within himself, past the long centuries of loneliness and self-hatred, and pulled forth the immense, raw, and terrifying power of his vampiric essence. It was a cold, black tide, the very supernatural nature of his being, a force he had kept rigorously contained for centuries. The air around him grew intensely cold, causing the dust motes in the moonbeams to shimmer with an unnatural intensity. He began to channel the raw, ambient energy of the manor, the residual ethereal essence left behind by generations of oracles, the latent magic woven into the old stone, the very life force of the surrounding skeletal oaks. He pulled it all toward the sigil, his mind focusing on a single, complex, and highly descriptive phrase in the forgotten ancient tongue of his ancestors, the Arden's Spies, the burning hope. As the energy flowed, Cassian began to chant, his voice no longer the formal baritone of the Dominus, but a deep, resonant rumble, a sound that spoke of geological time and immense, contained power. The old language was poetic and highly descriptive, each word a complex spell. Tex ta flecte non frange, omen ignis, ancoram mim, fac spes ardens. Bend, do not break, omen of fire, my anchor, make hope burn. The response was immediate and terrifying. The hexagonal sigil in the floor began to glow, first with a faint, pulsing crimson, the color of his own ancient bloodline, and then it escalated violently. The light shifted, intensifying to a blinding white, then finally to a terrifying sky-blue flame that shot upward in a great, silent column, piercing the dusty ceiling of the library. This was the blue fire of the prophecy, the ethereal energy of the oracle's bloodline, amplified and distorted by his own powerful, supernatural nature. It was an unmistakable, world-changing beacon. It screamed its location across the darkened continents, announcing to every hunting party, every broken covenant, and every zealous fanatic that the oracle was here. The effect was instantaneous. Far in the distance, a sound that Cassian had not heard for 2 centuries began, the sharp, metallic clang of a war horn, followed by the terrifying, rhythmic thud of heavy boots upon frozen ground. The siege had begun, drawn by the undeniable, manufactured lure of the Arden's spies. Cassian stood tall amidst the roaring column of false light, his face immutable, a statue carved from determination and the grim irony of the situation. He was the perfect high-stakes bait. His task was complete. Now came the combat. He retrieved the kopis, the weapon feeling strangely warm in his hand, and turned to face the vast black emptiness of the manor's front hall. He would not run. He was the Dominus, and he would hold the line for his anchor. Chapter 5. The initial wave of the assault hit Blackwood Manor, not minutes after the blinding blue beacon had vanished. The pacing shifted immediately from slow-burn atmosphere to sudden, brutal action. The front door's thick slabs of ancient, iron-banded oak exploded inward with a deafening, splintering roar under the force of a battering ram, letting in a flood of frigid autumn air and the heavily armed, cloaked figures of the Templar vanguard. They were armed with crossbows, silvered swords, and the same terrifying, corrupted, ethereal fire that the Inquisitors had wielded in the cellar. Their numbers were not vast, but their conviction was total, a force of zealous, world-changing belief. Cassian stood on the grand marble staircase landing, overlooking the ensuing chaos, a single dark silhouette against the fractured moonlight streaming through the shattered entrance. He was the silent, terrifying embodiment of Gothic fantasy. "Templars," Cassian's voice boomed, cutting across the shouts and the metallic scraping of armor. It was a formal, rhetorical challenge designed to draw their attention completely onto him. "You trespass on my domain. The oracle is not here. You have been led into a trap, children of the cross." The leader of the vanguard, a grizzled, scarred man in ornate, polished plate armor, raised his hand to stop his advancing troops. He recognized the figure. Everyone knew the Dominus by sight, a monument to the ancient enemies of their faith. "Lord Cassian, we have seen the blue fire. You cannot lie to the faithful. We will purge this land and take the prophecy for the glory of the one God." His declaration was fueled by immense, if misguided, zeal. Cassian descended the first 3 steps with unnerving, liquid grace. "Then you will die beautifully," he murmured, his only attempt at dark, self-deprecating humor. It was a promise and a diagnosis. The battle began without another word. The Templars, convinced of their divine right, launched their attack. Crossbow bolts tipped with holy water and silver flew toward him in a deadly hail. Cassian did not dodge or weave. His speed was such that he was already through the space where the bolts had flown, having covered the 20 feet to the nearest group of Templars in a fraction of a second. The kopie's blade became a terrifying, accelerated blur of dark metal. This was not the contained precision of the seller. This was a display of raw, overwhelming supernatural power. He sought to create a visceral, unforgettable deterrent, a high-stakes tableau of destruction that would ensure the enemy focused all subsequent efforts on him, buying Ilara and Melody time. He carved a path through the vanguard with an efficiency that bordered on the terrifyingly artistic. One moment a Templar was roaring a war cry, the next he was falling silently, his armor no defense against the ancient vampire's strength. The scent of blood, a rich, dark wave, was overpowering, but Cassian ignored it completely, his focus absolute, driven by his fierce, protective nature. His struggle was not just external survival, it was the ultimate, character-driven internal conflict, resisting the urge to succumb to the raw, killing instinct of his kind, maintaining his terrible control. He allowed no ethereal fire to touch him, the blue flames sputtering uselessly against the air distorted by his immense speed. He was a force of cold, purposeful chaos. As the first wave was broken and routed, the second, more dangerous force arrived, a detachment of mercenaries and rival Covenant traitors, armed not with faith, but with powerful, dark magic and specific anti-vampire weaponry. Their arrival was signaled by the shattering of all the remaining windows, shards of glass showering the hall like crystallized tears. Their leader, a grim, leather-clad woman who smelled of sulfur and betrayal, leveled a strange, smoking carbine at him. "The Dominus is distracted. Take the manor. The child must be here," she screamed, her words echoing the constant, terrifying threat of exposure. Cassian knew that if they discovered the library passage, all his sacrifice would be in vain. He met their charge with a terrible roar, not of pain, but of pure, unadulterated warning, his eyes flashing their unnaturally bright amber. "I will not fail again." He committed fully, letting the darkness take him, becoming a vengeful storm of speed and force. The fight was a symphony of destruction and the stark contrast between light and shadow. He fought, not to win a war, but to buy a single precious hour of lead time. His ancient oath was the only thing that mattered. Chapter 6. The fighting had drawn away from the grand hall, spilling out onto the frostbitten grounds and into the deeper, shadowed recesses of the manor's west wing. Cassian was executing a calculated retreat, strategically leading the bulk of the remaining besiegers away from the library and the hidden passage. He was a master of combat, but his objective was never victory, only to exhaust their immediate capacity to pursue Ilara and Melody. The supernatural nature of his endurance was pushed to its limits. His coat was slashed, his marble skin was scarred by several glancing blows of silvered weapons, and the powerful, contained fury was beginning to show cracks of true, animalistic rage. He was the perfect, terrifying spectacle. The poetic and highly descriptive internal state of the Dominus was a focus of the close third-person narrative. I have bled for centuries, but never with such desperate purpose. This blood is the price of my redemption. He stood now in the wreckage of the conservatory, a beautiful, skeletal ruin of wrought iron and shattered glass, surrounded by the bodies of the vanquished. The remaining attackers, the toughest, most fanatical Templars, and the mercenary leader with the smoking carbine, were wary, their initial zeal replaced by a chilling realization of the ancient vampire's devastating power. The mercenary woman, bleeding from a superficial wound on her face, spoke with a voice heavy with tension. "You are alone, Dominus. The girl is not here. We will simply wait you out. Dawn will break soon, and you will be ash." It was a cold, high-stakes declaration of ultimate vulnerability. Cassian stood amidst the shards of glass, his stillness unnatural. He raised the kopis, letting the meager moonlight glint once on its dark, matte surface. He saw the skeletal branches of the oaks outside the window, a perfect visual metaphor for his own state, beautiful, ancient, and nearly broken. He did not deny her claim, but answered with the formal, character-revealing dialogue he used for existential threats. The choice is yours. You may wait for the sun and die slowly, having failed in your pathetic errand. Or you may attempt one final charge and die quickly with your conviction intact. He was offering them the dignity of a warrior's end, a final, chilling, powerful mercy. As he spoke, he channeled the last vestiges of the manor's stored ethereal energy, not into an outward display, but into himself. The wound on his forearm, a shallow but painful cut, began to close, the skin stitching itself back together with unnerving speed. He had to be whole for the final stand. He was the one-man siege defense. The Templar leader, a man driven by guilt of his own making, finally broke. With a desperate, feral cry, he charged, carbine blazing, the weapon spitting silver shrapnel rounds. Cassian met the charge not with a dodge, but with a horrifying, decisive counterattack. The final action was sparse and purposeful. He allowed one round to strike his shoulder, a deliberate sacrifice to create an opening. The pain was sharp, intense, but transient. In the fraction of a second the mercenary leader took to register the hit, Cassian was upon her. He did not use the blade, he used his hand. He plunged his long, impossibly cold fingers into the exposed joint of her shoulder, a move of gruesome intimacy, and tore the weapon free, throwing it with such force that it shattered against a distant stone wall. He did not kill her. He simply disarmed and incapacitated her completely, leaving her screaming, her trauma now purely physical. The remaining few Templars, witnessing the sheer, terrible reality of his strength, lost their nerve. Their loneliness in this dark, ruined place was absolute. They broke, scattering into the shadows, running not from a man, but from a force of ancient nature. Cassian stood in the ruined conservatory, the air now silent save for the heavy, rasping breaths of the fallen and the faint, rhythmic pounding of his own preternaturally slow heart. Dawn was still hours away. The manor was destroyed, his location compromised, but the last trace of the enemy had been broken. He had bought them time. He sank onto a crumbling stone bench, his enormous frame suddenly heavy with the weight of centuries. He was melancholy and utterly alone. He looked down at the silver locket Melody had touched, now sitting on the stone floor where he had momentarily dropped it. The sigil pulsed once, a faint, almost imperceptible thrum, confirming the safety of its owner, a single quiet beat of hope. He was driven by guilt and his unbreakable oath, and he had fulfilled his terrible purpose. The stage was now set for the next chapter in the catacombs, where the true, complex nature of the Oracle's power would be revealed.